All right, well, good afternoon, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I am so delighted that IBM is hosting this session. We have some extraordinary women with us, and this topic of inclusion and intersectionality is a very important topic for IBM. In fact, it was in 1953, believe it or not, that IBM's CEO wrote what we call policy letter number 4. And policy letter number 4 was a note to all employees that IBM would always hire, irrespective of race, creed, color, sex, orientation. So it was a very progressive thing for IBM to do way back when. And so part of the IBM brand has always been about how do we make sure that our teams and the clients that we have reflect the world, that we're a mirror of the world. So being at the forefront of the conversation on inclusion, thinking about why that matters more than ever because of the times we live in, and because technology, which is advancing at such a rapid pace, is determined by who helps program it and who helps code the algorithm. So these topics of inclusion, these topics of diversity, these topics of intersectionality are something that IBM is incredibly passionate about. So I am thrilled to have such wonderful female colleagues with me today. And let me start with Jalak Jobanputra, who is the founding partner of FuturePerfect Ventures. She, amongst many, knows well the issue that women face often when they're raising capital. Lindsey, Turrentine, the editor-in-chief of CNET, a long, prominent spokeswoman on all things tech, but also for women in the workforce. Rouba, Mhaissen, founder and director of the Sawa Foundation, dealing on the front lines of the global refugee crisis. And Randi Davis, director for gender equality and women's empowerment for the UNDP. So I am thrilled to have you here. Let me start with a very simple question for each of you, which is, as you have progressed in your career and you represent society and business and capital, what challenges have you faced and how have you overcome your obstacles? I'll start, perhaps, Randi, why don't we start with you?
I would have to say the biggest challenge for me, which is very common for women around the world, is the challenge of balancing your work and your life. And balancing, especially as you start to have children or elderly parents. And I think this is the largest challenge that I faced and has caused me to slow track my career at points and pick it up. So I think we'll go at some point to discussions about some of the challenges that and solutions out there, but I think one of the key issues we need to look at is how work adapts to the needs of women to come in and out and maybe go on slow track and come back and still have an opportunity to give into their career.
Lindsey, what about you?
For me, my challenge has long been convincing myself that in any given conversation I'm supposed to be there, which is a difficult one. I can't, I'm in media. There are many times at tech conferences I'm standing around in a group of people, and the vibe toward me changes profoundly when people find out what I do. Often the assumption is that I'm assisting a person next to me, which is, and I felt that over and over again. And teaching myself to make it very clear that I'm there because I have something to add and say, and because I'm leading in this realm, has been something I've had to teach myself to do, or look to my peers to teach me to do. That's been a challenge.
And Jalak, what about you?
Well, for me, it's actually convincing other people. I never question whether I belong. It was really, I'm an immigrant. I kind of grew up very creative. I was a serious ballet dancer, and then was going to be a writer, and I took an economics class in college that I just kind of fell in love with, and I didn't know anything about business. I'd never been exposed to business before. Ended up going into investment banking, so the belly of the beast, after college, and then started an internet company in 1997 in New York. Enjoyed that, but missed deal making and went into venture. And throughout my venture career, I was always amazed at how myopic, an industry that's supposed to be so forward-thinking really is. I mean, we all now know about the lack of diversity, but I went into venture in '99 in Silicon Valley, and I consider that worse than Wall Street in terms of diversity and culture. So that gives you an idea of how far we've come and still how far we have to go. And I decided to start my own fund 5 years ago, partly for that reason. I was worried about our futures, and not just women's, but the world's future if we only have one demographic making these decisions on what technology gets funded, what entrepreneurs get funded, what decisions are made at a board level with very little diverse representation. So it's really convincing the rest of the world that this is urgent.
Mm-hmm. And what about you, Rouba?
I think for me, my biggest challenge really is that I'm not a white man in a suit. Like, that's been constantly like the biggest challenge of how can you be taken seriously as a woman. In our settings, for example, in the Arab world, to be taken seriously, you have to act a certain way, but then when you're in a Western context, you have to act completely differently. So how to play these identities differently, especially that when I first started Sawa, the work with refugees, as a Syrian myself, I was only 22 years old, so I was very young at the time and a woman, so that's definitely hard. The second challenge, I would say, is how to balance between embracing your empathy that you have as a woman, that you always, you know, when I'm on field with refugees or when I'm in my organization, which is more or less a flat management, you want to have that empathy that you're born with, but at the same time, in settings with, you know, lobbyists or in policy settings, you always have to be very firm, or, you know, you have to be, you know, you have to say your word in a certain tone, and how can you be both at the same time and still be you? I think that's the biggest challenge.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
So all four of you are fiery, passionate, talented, leading women. And who inspired you? Who's the source of inspiration for you? When you face obstacles, when you face challenges, what gives you inspiration?
Oh, easy. My mom. And my mom was not, you know, in the business world, but as I said, I was born in Kenya. We moved when I was young. She was actually a doctor and gave up her career because we were in a strange new country. I mean, they had nannies when we were in Kenya, but they moved here with nothing and didn't even know how to find childcare and didn't know the education system. So she stayed, I mean, she kind of sacrificed everything for us. And that's a story that's often told in the immigrant households. But she always encouraged me to reach for whatever I wanted to. When I was a ballet dancer, that's very unusual for an Indian immigrant child, but I got into the School of American Ballet. They actually drove me into New York from New Jersey to do that. So is this like never-ending support, and knowing that she was so educated, she had made a decision to step back and sacrifice. And then she was dismissed a lot because she spoke with an accent. I mean, she's one of the smartest people I know, much smarter than most of the people I interact with on a day-to-day basis. But just because she had an accent, because she was a brown woman and didn't grow up in the U.S., there were all these attitudes, you know, that made it hard for her to really blossom. And so that's always been my driving force. But it's also the fact that she doesn't hold it against anybody. She just views it as, you know, you just got to work on changing the world around you. You can't blame other people for that. And so that's really what I take into account, you know, whenever I get upset about the way I'm treated. It's really about moving things forward. They may be going forward slowly, but it's up to us to do that.
Best source of inspiration, Lindsey.
So I always go back to a conversation I had with an unlikely person early in my career. I was 27. And I was newly managing a group of editors, journalists, and I was pregnant. And I was not only the first person I worked with in this setting to get married and start a family, but it was just totally unusual. At the time, I was at CNET even then, and it was a startup at the time, and people were just baffled by my decision. Like, you're what? You're getting married? Why? And then I got pregnant, and I am also type 1 diabetic. So I went into my boss and I said, hey, guess what? I'm pregnant. Also, it's going to be a really medical pregnancy. I'm going to be out a lot. I'm going to have a lot of tests. I'm going to have a lot of appointments. I'm really sorry. I am anticipating that it's going to be a busy time of year when I go out on maternity leave. I'm apologizing and apologizing and apologizing. And he just said, this is at the time, a childless, unmarried 50-year-old white guy. And he goes, stop. You are intelligent, driven, a wonderful manager. You have nothing to apologize for. If you don't, he's like, you're a woman. Women have babies. I don't have, that's fine. Go do it. Take the time that you need, and we will be right here when you get back. And you should never apologize for the work that you have to do to be a woman and do your job well, which you do. And it was an unlikely source. I've never forgotten it, that he just said, stop. Do not apologize for the things that you're built to do.
Rouba, I'm going to switch the question a little bit because your job must be very hard. You know, you're in tough situations every single day, and people's lives are on the line. So when you have those difficult days and you know you're the leader, what gives you inspiration? What inspires you to keep fighting, to keep pushing?
First, I want to say that there is 6 seats in the front if anyone wants to. 6 empty seats. Actually, I want to answer 2 questions. The first one very quickly. I remember when I was 11, we were sitting in the garden in Syria, and my dad had guests, like, you know, businessmen and his brothers. There was some guests, and I was always sitting there, even though I was only 11. I loved to hear about, you know, them talking about politics and economics and all of this. And then I remember my father turning to me and asking me, "What do you think?" I was only 11, and the way he looked at me, and he made everyone silent because he was waiting for my answer, as if my answer really mattered. And I was, you know, the only little girl there. I think that stayed with me my whole life. That, you know. And it's really inspiring to be born to a feminist father, even though he probably might not call himself feminist. But yeah, I mean, what gives me inspiration, I think, is really the communities that I work with on the ground. And I'm not saying that because it's cliche or it's the cheesy thing, but I remember in almost 2013 at one of the biggest waves of Syrian displacement, and there was a group of families that had just arrived to Lebanon running from a genocide. And we just gave them one tent, and it was a very basic tent. And I come in and I hear a very loud noise of chopping wood, and I go in and I found this woman with her 6 children. And I tell her, "What are you doing?" And she says, "I'm chopping wood because I want to put shelves in my kitchen," and it's literally just one tent. And I'll never forget, she had just arrived. There was blood on her dress from a genocide. So all of these women heads of household, like, they are doing extraordinary, inspiring thing every day on the ground. And I think we are just, you know, 1% of what they represent, and they always inspire me.
It's funny you say, you talk about your dad. I've had the good fortune of becoming friends with Malala and her family over the years, and her father's book is due out in the spring. It's called Let Her Fly, and by all accounts it'll be this extraordinary testament to how important mothers and fathers are to the development of young women. So I'm so excited to read it. I know he's been passionately writing. Randi, what about you?
Well, I would have to say the same thing. I mean, it's really the people that we're working with that are inspiring me daily. When I was very young, in my 20s, my first posting was in Asia, in Bangladesh. And at that time, all the senior women in my office, all the senior positions in my office were filled by women. So, and I won't say how old I am, but it was quite a while ago, where I had not seen that in my own background in Canada. So I was really inspired watching them and how they were able to break through a lot of gender stereotypes and assume leadership roles. And also just watching how women were able to negotiate the private and public space and manage to, you know, bring something different to the work that they do. I think, you know, we heard about the sort of empathetic side that they bring, and really being able to connect with people and bring that passion. I have seen it, you know, both sort of on the day-to-day basis with some of my female colleagues, but then also I've been very fortunate to work with some world leaders who have really trained me and mentored my career. People like Helen Clark, who was the administrator for UNDP and a former prime minister, and Winnie Byanyima, who's now at Oxfam. It's really amazing to see women in leadership roles, and they're going the extra mile, they're reaching everybody, they're connecting, and it's a different sort of leadership, and it's something that really is very inspiring and makes you step out of any apprehension you had if you thought your voice maybe didn't count, or or you couldn't bring to the table something valuable. So
many women here are technologists, developers, startups, businesswomen, and it's such a critical time for all of you to have your moment, because Lord knows the technology world, the startup world, the investment world, the venture world needs so many more women. But I have a hypothesis, and I want you to either tell me I'm right or I'm wrong. And I actually believe that this is, it's been said before, but I do believe this is the moment for women. I think that there's a bigger pipeline than we've ever seen. We know more about policies and practices that can actually keep women passionate, excited, engaged in the workforce, and that the moment is demanding change. I would ask you, is this the moment for women, or is this yet another false start? Go ahead, Lindsey.
I'm not sure there is a moment. I think that we've been having a series of moments for, I mean, frankly, hundreds of years, right? I was watching a documentary about Emily Dickinson on the plane, and I mean, go figure, but fiercely feminist in her own way. So there are moments throughout history, and we are in one, and it is very important. I think the energy that we have right now needs to come from the collective successes that we're seeing. So one thing that I've noticed in my own workplace, and I have a co-editor, there are two of us, both women, leading CNET, which is something else for a technology publication. And what I have noticed is that because we've both been in our roles for a little while, and we have been hiring over a long period of time, the representation of women and all kinds of different classes of people within the editorial ranks at CNET has become, it's been very large. We are extremely diverse staff, and I think, and I'm rambling a little bit, but I'm gonna get to the point. I think that some of that comes from the fact that we make a vision of a future that is diverse look possible. So as more and more women join any specific career path, it becomes easier for women to join that career path and to envision themselves as leaders within that kind of organization. The other thing that I've found is that as that has happened over time, so we're talking about over the last 15 years, the women on my staff are much more willing to ask for what they want. So maybe that's a promotion, maybe that's a raise, maybe that is a change in path or trying something new that previously they might have said, I'm not qualified for that. And they are empowered by each other. So I think that that's the important part of this moment. As certain career paths reach critical mass for women or any other group, we're getting to a moment where people are getting more comfortable asking for what they deserve, and that's what we need to hold on to.
So Jalak, what does it take to get more women entrepreneurs funded and more women in venture capital?
Well, I think the two are very related, and it's while there's been so much focus over the last 5 years on women entrepreneurs not getting funded. I mean, what I wanted to show by starting the fund is you put money, LPs, limited partners who fund funds, put money in the hands of diverse fund managers, and you will automatically see the number of diverse entrepreneurs get funded. Because I know my networks are very different. Plus, they're very different. Plus, I also have the networks that my white male colleagues have because I've been in the industry so long. So you get everything, whereas I'd say I've had male colleagues over the years say they've never had a woman pitch to them. I do a lot of fintech, AI, blockchain, and I don't have that issue. Actually, 50+% of my portfolio companies are female founders in sectors where most of the press, most other VCs would say there aren't women founding companies in those sectors. So I think it's just, as a VC, we have a choice of who we interact with, who we take meetings with, and who we come across on a day-to-day basis. And I think that is the single one thing. And I'm working with limited partners now to make them see that. And what they have said is, well, our returns are great investing in Kleiner Perkins. Right. Well, that may have been true in the 20th century. I don't think that's going to be true in this century. And if venture doesn't keep up, if the limited partners don't keep up, people are going to go elsewhere and create wealth in other ways.
What's one piece of advice each of you would have for the many talented people here in the audience as they think about progressing their own careers, overcoming their own fears, and really achieving all that they want to achieve? Best advice.
I just want to quickly answer the previous question by saying it will be a moment for women when half of the audience will be women here, because there's about 5 men and maybe 100 people in the room. So I think the moment men start to engage with and take this panel as seriously as software engineering and whatever, you know, I think that would be a moment, a good moment for women.
You know, just to build on that, because I've been writing a lot about this topic lately. I actually find, I think we have hit a point, some limited partners and some men excluded, but the vast majority of men actually want to make a difference, who are in positions of power, actually would prefer to have a more inclusive team. Not all, but I think we're at the point where the majority would. And I totally agree with you that the past 2 decades, especially, have been about what women need to do. And I think we're entering in a period where if we're going to achieve all we want to achieve, it's got to be what men are also willing to do to make sure change happens.
Yeah, and actually it's also including women, but what women? Like if it's always the privileged, you know, I have a PhD, I speak so many languages, and I'm sitting here, okay, good enough. But what about, for example, other women? What about women with, I mean, this panel is about intersectionality. So, for example, only Facebook has achieved 4% of women of color in its staff. You know, Google still didn't achieve 4%. So it's also about what women are you including. But going back to the advice part, I think like just be yourself unapologetically, because we always, as you were saying, we're always, you know, questioning ourselves or saying, are we good enough, or just not being ourselves. But I remember like an advice that I got when I was younger, just always be yourself. And I think when people read that you're a genuine person, it automatically will unleash so many resources. If you're genuine in asking for fund for your enterprise, or if you're genuine in the way you're responding to a question or anything, just like be genuine and be you. And it might seem like very straightforward, but it requires a lot of courage to be yourself, but just be yourself, I would say,
Randi, what about
Maybe
you?
I would add to that, I think networking is really tremendously important for women to get, you know, where they need to be, networking with other women, networking with men. Really focusing and investing on networking, in addition to all the things you need to do, of course, to put yourself out there and to feel confident that your voice counts. But I think there's also, just going back to some of the challenges we're facing, there are a lot of challenges, and there's still a huge inequality in a range of areas in terms of women's access to education, participation, to prepare women for the future. So I think it's incumbent on both businesses, governments, all of us really to push it to that next level. So we're seeing progress, and I do think it's we're in a new era, and I think the next generation of girls is very vocal in demanding equality, and that to me is what's giving me a lot of optimism. But I think we still should not lose sight that the gaps, and I could rattle them off but would not want to, are still really quite significant, and we need to double down efforts to close them, and whether it's finance, participation on not just boards in politics, in just about every segment, in economic participation, and then you have huge inequalities in different regions and you know, rural, urban. There's so many intersectionalities of these issues. So I would just really put that as something that we all need to not lose sight, that when we see a room like this, that those gaps are still really quite present.
Lindsey, best advice.
I was just, in the mentorship area for the Women-in-Tech area, which is a couple of halls down. And I was sitting with a young woman who's working in Germany, and she's from Lithuania. And it was a really interesting conversation, because she sort of said to me, I want to get ahead, I work very hard, I work all the time. She has a client that is a very conservative, male-dominated client. She's a software engineer. She said, I don't know how to live my life, because all of the men that I work with actually are like, I have to go home and pick up my kids from soccer. You don't have kids, you take this, you stay late. I don't know how to deal with this. My advice to her was tell your story and just be very clear about who you are, what you're doing outside of work, and that it does not matter. So the power of storytelling in being yourself, projecting who you want to be seen as a human and a person who has a life, who has your own aspirations, is very important. And my advice to her, I think, is my advice to everybody. Tell your story and know that your stories are interesting to people and just as legitimate as anybody else's stories. And if that story is, I'm coaching a soccer team and I need to leave work early because, oh my gosh, you should see these girls on the field. This is really important to me and I'm going to be leaving at 5 to handle this. Do that. If your story is anything that's important to you, make sure you're talking about it. Because the more you talk about who you are as a person, and maybe that has to do with what you do at work, but maybe it has to do with what you do outside of work, the more people can see that you have every right to be doing the same things that they are, regardless of who they are and regardless of the reasons you're different.
Jalak, best advice?
I think persistence. I've never seen a successful person, man or woman, who hasn't been more persistent than the person next to them to succeed. I mean, it's true in my case, it's true in the entrepreneurs I've invested in that have had big exits. I mean, everything looks like an overnight success from the outside. And you know, I think especially in this age of like Instagram and social media where everyone's like killing it and crushing it, I mean, the reality is so different and just not being swayed by that. And if you have a goal and a mission, you will have to work hard and take a lot of rejection to get to where you are, so where you want to be. So I'd say don't give up easily, and don't let others try to make you give up easily. I mean, people told me when I started the fund that I was doing the impossible, and 5 years later, it's one of the top funds in the sector. So if I'd listened to even my mentors, frankly, I wouldn't have done it.
That's great. I want to get to the audience here for questions, so please prepare your questions, but I'll ask a rapid fire question as people are preparing. And do we have microphones? They're going to rove here? Terrific. So if you have a question, please get ready to ask. One quick thing, one change you're committed to seeing in the world in the next year. One change you're committed to seeing in the world in the next year, in your organization or in the world.
Tolerance.
Tolerance.
Yeah.
Tolerance. Rouba?
Oh, it's a hard one because my country is at war. So probably for me it's peace. You know, people who actually have rights. It's not only the right to vote and it's the right to life and a dignified life. So maybe dignity would be like seeing more dignity, and it goes all the way from big organizations to people who are being tortured in prisons today.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Thank you. Randi, Lindsey? Go ahead.
I think I would like to see finding more joy in each other in general, more connection at a human level between people who might not otherwise connect.
Well, I mean, it's a difficult question. We work on, I work on gender equality around the world, so of course that's where we want to go. It's not going to happen in a year. But you definitely, I think what, for me, is bringing it both to the work and then, as you were saying, the human connection. Really making that difference in the day-to-day and being very mindful about what you do and the impact that it's having on the people you're doing it with.
We're now going to break and do some networking, but I wanted to say thank you to all of you. I think women like us fly to Lisbon because of people like you. And it's inspiring to be around so many passionate women and a couple good men who can make a difference in the world and who can make a difference with the companies you start and the code you write and the society you build and the families you build and the way you teach those around you can make a huge difference. So thank you for inspiring us to want to be here with you. Thank you.